Okay, so check this out. We have got our application that we've been working on in previous episodes, except now we have some custom filtering controls, a drop-down list, and a freeform phone number lookup that allows us to do wildcards, so we can search any part of a phone number, which is exactly what we want to see there. So we can search based off of the phone number, and we can use our app just like we did before. We can select a row in the list here, and it will show the data on the right hand side in the controls on the right hand side, except now we can go ahead and do advanced filtering, which is going to make our user's job much easier. And those are the techniques we're going to learn in today's video. Let's go check it out. I'm your host, Sean MacKenzie. Thank you for joining me once again on my channel on data engineering. In this episode, we go back to our WebForms playlist, and we're going to add to our little tow truck operations database, and we're going to add some filters to our list. The first filter is going to be a drop-down list that we can select from, after which the list will update to whatever we selected. And then we're also going to have a freeform text field where we're going to type in sort of a like operator so we can search on phone numbers based on just a few entries. Let's get to it. Interested in more topics in this area? Make sure to check out my Patreon. The link is in the description. Okay guys, so today we're going back to our ASP.NET web application running on .NET 4.7.2. You can also do this project on 4.8, and here are all of our objects. Make sure to check out my previous episodes where I introduce this project and we do our first pages. We have certainly come a long way, and you can see if I click on our default page there, default.aspx, it comes up with the HTML-like code that we can see in our source pane here. You can see the source is selected on the bottom left. And that is our content page, which is inside of the site master. And do make a note, we will be adding more content pages. Since those are the pages of your application, we have a single page app right now. And if I switch to the design view, like you saw, I clicked on the design in the bottom left there, you can see a more graphical representation of what we have been coding. And you can see there's a grid view there, there's some data entry fields and an update button, and we will be adding some filters to our page. And so what we'll do is we're going to add those right in the middle of the page here. Now this is the representation here. We're going to add it right after the sentence that says this is your list of tow jobs. Now if I run the application, I can hit F5, or I can click that button you saw there that has the IIS Express on it, and it will start it on your local machine. And I will note that I am running a replica database to our Azure SQL database. I'm running a replica database locally so that it can speed up my development, but you don't have to do that. So you might notice the difference is different between my local and the remote database. But if I run it locally here, you can see I click on each line here and I select it, and the data fields on the right hand side are updated, and they can be changed or updated. And you can see this is our driver list, and that's what we want to see. And here's our contact phone. Now we're going to be using the driver list and the contact phone today. We're going to use the drop down for the driver to filter our tow jobs listing, and we're also going to use the freeform phone number field, which is going to allow us to use the like operator. So you can do sort of, selections where, it might have any of these numbers in it or something like that. So to add to our page, our filters, we can simply add some text. In this case, we'll add it at the end of that sentence there, and we'll be adding a driver drop down and a phone number free text field for filtering. And so I've added the two kind of tags in our sentence there, and then we can just open our toolbox and we can grab the control that we want from the toolbox, and we can drag that onto our page here, and I'll just drop that on there, even though that's going to be for the driver. I'll click out of there, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag this over after the driver text. So now you can see there is a ASP drop-down list there for us to use, and that is the first control that we're going to put on there. And I'll add some spacing a little bit there, and for the driver and for the phone. You can also put these into a table, or you can style them however you like. In fact, we're going to be adding some styling later in the series. We're actually going to be going and applying all of the bootstrap styling, which looks really nice. So stay tuned for that. Now, as the second control, I'm dragging a text box out of the toolbox and dropping it onto our page, and you can see there we go, we've got our drop down list and our text box, which kind of appears down below due to the the designer here, but it will look different when it is executed and shown in the browser. So it's more about the order of the elements when you're in this screen, more so than the actual design. Now we're going to right click and go to properties, and we can go to properties, and now we can apply a proper name to our controls so that they are easily identifiable in our code and other places. Now, one quick note while I'm putting these names onto the controls here, the IDs, that Bootstrap 5.1, which is almost the very latest Bootstrap, it basically is the latest Bootstrap, which has really nice controls and all kinds of things, has been added to the latest WebForms project in Visual Studio. And so make sure you get the latest Visual Studio and start WebForms application using the latest Bootstrap controls, because those are all of the nice controls and things that you can see on the internet. And our WebForms project has been updated in Visual Studio so that you can create the most modern looking and operating interfaces. Okay, so now just as a test, what we'll do is we're going to sort of just click on our page somewhere here, and then we can run IIS Express, and that's going to start our project so that we can sort of get an idea of what we're looking at. Obviously it's not completed yet, but we want to see where did those controls land, where do they show up in the browser, and how does it look. And so here we go. Now we can see we have an empty drop-down list with nothing in it, and we have a phone text control that we'll be using for our wildcard search that we'll be doing against Azure SQL. Now on our right side you can see there is our driver drop-down list, and the reason why we're looking at that is because we're going to reuse the loading of that in our search drop-down list so that our users can easily select from that. Now what I did there is I switched from our design view to our source view, which is where we can use the markup language, and then I hit F7 to switch to the code view, but you can also get code view by just going to view and then code. You'll see it has F7 beside it in case you want to use the shortcut. And so there is our Visual Basic code, and this is the code we've been using since the start of our project, our WebForms project. And what we're going to do is we're going to make some changes to our Visual Basic code, and that's what we can do now. Now our refresh list procedure is the main one. It runs every time the page loads, regardless of whether it's a post back, and then you can see the is post back is sort of like a true or false, and if you're getting a post back you don't want to reload everything like combo boxes and things like that, and that's what that is for. And there is the update combos subroutine right there. We're not really going to touch that today, but we are going to benefit from it because our update combos includes our driver and driver name in it. And so you can see that this would be very, very handy to reuse, because we're going to reload or load our driver search drop-down list, which is going to have the same information as our driver drop-down list. And we loaded that data into that data set there, and we called it TTMP driver, and then we got a TBL data, or our data table, which is loaded with the driver information already. So, we loaded this CBO driver drop-down list using these 4 commands here, and we can actually just copy those 4 lines, and we can load a different drop-down list with the same information, because the data table is still persistent in our procedure here, so it's still loaded. So why not just load up the other drop-down list using that? And so all I'm going to do is I copied those four lines that bind our combo box, as you'd say in Access, or our drop-down list, and I'm just changing it to filter driver instead of the driver list. And so it's going to have exactly the same data fields and everything, but it has a different ID. And now if I run our project, you can see that the combo box should be loaded. There we go. We've got Harry there as our first selection in our list. And you can see if I scroll down there, those are all of our drivers, and that's exactly what we want to see there. Now, we do have one problem that comes out of this, and that is the fact that there's no empty selection. What if we don't want to have something selected in our combo box? And so we can do that very easily by simply adding another item into our combo box. And we can add that after it's been loaded. You can add it to the data table before it's loaded, or you can just add an item to the combo box after it's loaded. And so we're just going to add a new item into our combo box, and we can do that by using the new list item inside of our add method here. And so we can see, we can go CBO filter drivers.items.add, and then we're just going to add a new list item, which is basically blank ID with a blank description. And those will each have a length of 0 whenever we look at them, and that's going to be handy a little bit later on in our project here. And so I'll hit F5, or you can hit the go button on the toolbar, and it'll start your project. And so here we go. We can see now we can choose an empty item, so that if we want to return to the full list, we can still do that. And that's exactly what we want to do there. And then from there, what we can do is we can set our selected value equal to an empty string. And the reason we do that is because when it first loads up, we want it to be empty. We don't want it to be set to the first one in the list, which might be a name or something like that. And so here we go. Now we've got our combo box, or our drop-down list, loaded up, and that's what we want to see. And the default value was empty, and that's also what we wanted. Our phone is also empty. That is a text box, sort of free text entry there, and that is what we want to see there too. So now we can go ahead and move on and start looking at how to filter our data. Okay, I guess you could call this part 2. Now that we have our input controls ready to go, now we need to change what happens when our refresh list procedure is called, and that is the one procedure that we have that we use to refresh the list. Now right now you can see that the refresh list function sort of looks like this, and it's got it has an SQL string in it to connect to our Azure SQL database, and we've got a data adapter there for SQL client, and we're going to be making some changes here to our, not only to our SQL string, but we're also going to be adding some parameters and things like that so that we can filter our data exactly the way that we want to. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to sort of truncate that string. We're going to get rid of the order by for now and all of that stuff, and we're going to leave the base SQL string, which is select tow ID, vehicle, tow address, and contact phone, and called in and completed from tow job. So that's a select statement which selects everything. And then what we want to do is we're going to do some work before we create our data adapter, and we're going to do some work after we create our data adapter. And so the work we're going to do before we create our data adapter is to check those controls, the combo box or drop-down list, as you might say, and the text box. We're going to see if the text entries in there have a length that's greater than 0. And if they do, then we're going to add them into our SQL string, and we're also going to create parameters for them. Now we're going to change the SQL string before we create the data adapter, and we're going to add the parameters after we create the data adapter, because you can see that the SQL string is actually one of the arguments we're going to be using for this create statement. And so what we're going to do is we're going to say, if our length of our filter driver combo box is greater than 0, then we're going to create our where statement. We'll say where driver equals, and then we're going to use that @driver parameter, which is the safest way to do your data collection, especially if it's with out in the wild kind of thing. You don't want to use dynamic SQL here with the parameters. You want to actually use full parameters for this. And so we're going to say where driver equals @driver, and then we're also going to do if the txt filter phone.text is greater than 0, then the first thing we'll do is we're going to go and we'll check if our where statement has a length of 0. If it does, then we'll start the where statement with where. That means that the driver had no selection, and we want to say we still need to have the word where in there. So if the driver combo box has an entry, then we'll start with where. Otherwise, we'll start with where on the phone search item. And there we go. There is our where statement in the phone search item if there's no selection on the driver. Otherwise, it uses and, so that you can say this driver and this phone selection, or vice versa. So then once we've worked out that part of it, the where and the and, we can go ahead and add whatever was in the filter phone text box, and we can add that into our string here. And like we did before, we're going to use a parameter, but we're also using the like operator, and we're going to be using contact phone like, and then our parameter @phone, and the like operator is going to allow us to use those wildcards, so we can type in any part of a phone number and it's going to come up, and that's exactly what our users want, because it'll make it nice and easy for them to find people's phone numbers. So there we go. We've got our where string in there, and now what we'll do is we'll add that where string into our SQL string. If it exists, it'll be concatenated in there, and if not, it will not be, since it won't have any length. And then we'll have an order by statement, so we'll say strSQL is equal to itself, and then add the where string if there is one there, and then order by whatever you want to order by. In this case, we'll just say tow ID, and that should do it for the where statement there. And now we can jump to after our creation of the data adapter. So you can see now I'm coding directly after the line of the data adapter creation, because the data adapter used the strSQL, this SQL string, and the connection to create itself. And now what we're going to do is we're going to add some parameters to our select command, and we can do that in a very similar manner to how we did the SQL string. We're going to check if the the controls had any value in them, so in this case a length of greater than 0, and if we have some value in our driver combo box there, then we'll add our driver parameter, and we're going to create that parameter as a new SQL client.SQL parameter, and that's going to have the name @driver, and it's going to have that value in there that we put in before, which is the CBO filter driver.selected value. I like to put in the double quotes to concatenate it with an empty string, just in case there are null values. That is very unlikely here. That is something that I do sometimes. And then we can say if the length of the empty string and the txt filter phone.text is greater than 0, then we'll add that parameter as well. And so we can do it the same way. We go dpt.select command.parameters.add, and it'll be new SQL client.SQL parameter. It appears I cannot type today. And there's our SQL parameter, and again we're using the @ sign for our parameter name so that it matches with our SQL statement, and that'll be @phone, and then we'll add the txt filter phone.text, and that gives us a value for that one. And so we have values going in, we have parameters that are optional and they start, and we can continue on. Okay, and so from there what I'm going to do is we're going to jump to the markup page. You can see that's selected as the source in the bottom left. Now I've closed all of the the view, the solution explorer, and all of those things just so that you can see this. You need to add these 2 lines in your async postback triggers so that they can work with your update panel, so you don't have the screen flickering and jumping to the top and all of that kind of crazy stuff. So those are 2 that we're going to add there, and we're going to add some more stuff. Okay, so as I mentioned, those 2 lines need to be added to the triggers section of your ASP.NET page there, your markup page, and then we're going to scroll down, and we need to add a couple of features to our new controls, and that's going to be the postback. So what that means is we want our button to cause a postback to the page or a refresh each time that the value is changed. And so what we're going to do is we'll say auto postback on the filter driver, and I'll do an auto postback on the filter phone, and that will cause that trigger the async postback that we created up above there. That's going to cause that to fire, and so that every time we change these, it's gonna cause it to do something, and we want that to happen because we want our list to update. And so if I hit F5 and the application starts up, I can choose Susan from the list here, and I can type in, let's see, 987 and tab off of there or hit enter, and you can see now it's got Susan's jobs and they have 987 in them, so I can click on those in the list there. I can change to Harry and click through his, and I can do 987, and that'll give me nothing because he didn't have any with that phone number. And I can also select empty, and that appears to not be working, so let's go fix that, because that should have given us those 2 rows that had 987 in it, and we can do that. That means that the like is not working, and so we can go and find that. So that's our refresh list there, and we're going to go and find the statement that we got. So that's the txt filter phone. And what we need to do is we need to go and we need to add our wildcards into our string for the parameter value. So we'll do that now. So we'll add, you're going to add the % in quotes and with an ampersand, and then we'll do ampersand and then the same thing on the end. And that'll allow you to have the value in either side. I forgot to put this on. And so you'll have the value on whether or not it starts with 987 or it ends with 987 or 987 is in the middle of whatever you're searching for. This will return it for those ones. So let's go try that out instead. And so we've got our app. It's starting up in our local database here, or our local app in localhost. And there we go. We can choose Harry. We can choose Mary. She doesn't have any tow jobs. Randy, he's got a couple in this database, and you can see that's his. You can select them and see that it is getting the right ones for the driver. So there we go. We've got Susan, and we can click on hers, and there is her name. And so now we can choose some random string here. I guess we could choose 909 or something. We'll do 909, and we'll tab off of that, and you can see now we've got 909 in this one and 909 in that one, and it's Susan's job. If we click Harry or John, they don't exist in those ones, or Randy, because only she had those ones. Only Susan had those jobs, and that was the 909 job there. And so, but if we go down and we select Winston or Harry and we clear it, we should get their jobs. There we go. Yeah, so we get Harry's job if we clear it out of there, and if we choose Randy, we get his jobs, and that is exactly what we want to see. We can click through and see the results in our app here, and that is exactly what we want to see. So I closed it, and that has stopped it from running on our local IIS there. Now I did notice that the selected row was sticking in our list there. So when we changed to another user and the second row was already selected, it was still selected when we changed to a different user. And so what we're going to do is we're going to add one row after our data bind statement in the refresh list, and set our index to -1 so that when we change to some other selection, it's going to release the selected row, because we don't want to keep the same one. So if I click on the second row here and then I go to Harry, now it's cleared. That's what we want to see there. So those are the kinds of things that we want to watch out for. The selection, make sure that it gets cleared and things like that. If I go to the empty selection and it gives me all of the rows, I don't have any of them selected. If I go to Susan and select the second one, you can see that's her tow job there. And if I go to Randy, it is released, and that is what we want to see. Now if I type in a wildcard with Randy, he doesn't have any, but if I go to the full list and look for 987, you can see those are those two jobs that had 987 in the phone number. And we can select one or the other of those. I think both of those were Susan's tow jobs. And we can clear that and tab or enter off of that, and it will give us the full list, and then we can choose Harry again. That's exactly how we want the operation of the filtering to work, so that's great. I can close it there, and now what we can do is we can go to build and then publish, and that is what we want to do now. We're going to publish it out into our Azure App Service so that our application will have these features out, in Azure, connecting to our Azure SQL database, so our users can use this app, and we'll go ahead and start that publish. So it's just churning away there, and it can take some time for it to complete publishing in Azure, but once it is done, it will try to start your browser if you've got that setting set up. And so now you can see we've got that nice address at the top, which is out in the internet, and we have to go through our authentication that we set up. And so this is my authentication. I have to put into my authenticator on my phone in order to log in and use this application. And there we go. That's our application. You can see it's towoperations.azure websites.net, and I can use the filtering just like I used in our local copy. And you can see up above there, it's getting the username, and we did that in the previous episode. Make sure you go check that one out, and you can see I can do all kinds of filtering here, and this is working exactly as we want it to, and not as many tow operations in this database. So as I mentioned, I have a replica on my local machine, and this is now using the Azure SQL database, which is exactly the same, and so it's exactly the same metadata, but it has different data in it. And so there we go. We can look for Susan with phone number 777, and we can select the entire database for 777, and it's still the same ones. But if we clear that, you can see the list changes, and that's exactly what we want to see there. You can add as many of these controls as you want, and that's how you can do custom filtering in your WebForms application. Need a time entry, punch in, punch out solution for your staff? Make sure to check out Bill's Zone. The link is in the description.